Stanisci of CFL Talk. Welcome to the Spanglish World Network on Zingo TV channel 250. Please remember to download the Zingo TV app at the respective app stores for iOS and Android devices. While you download the app, make sure you rate and leave a comment. Both apps are absolutely free. Zingo TV is also available on Google Chromecast, Amazon Fire TV sticks, Roku sticks, and also on all smart TVs 2016 forward. Now on CFL Talk, joining me as usual, David Morassutti. David, welcome. Good to see you again. Thanks for being here.
Good to see you too, Frank. It's been a fun 24 hours.
Yeah, it kind of has. I see by your apparel that you're still celebrating.
So I had to work yesterday at 5:00.
Oh,
so I could not celebrate. I had to watch the agony of the penalty kicks, and then go right to work. Well, I work from home, so
yeah.
Still get to enjoy it. Still get to enjoy the win.
So I haven't seen my mother for more than 2 minutes, 3 minutes at a time. Maybe in the past 2 years, about four or five times, and she came to visit. So she's been here. She was here already for a couple of days, and she says, "We're going to watch the soccer game." And I said, "Of course we'll watch the soccer game. Where are we going to watch the soccer game? On the big TV." Okay. So she sat there, and she only fell asleep for about 4 or 5 minutes during halftime. She's not a halftime person, but the game started, and she woke up just before the period started again, and she was thrilled. She really was thrilled at what was happening and how it went. And I'm sure she was exactly like, every other Italian everywhere, totally captured by the event. And to sort of put it in a football kind of, because we do CFL football, they kind of can parallel, the Argos can kind of parallel Italy, right? Their last season was pretty disastrous. They've had some disastrous seasons. With the right kind of management, the right kind of coach, head coach, GM, you can turn things around. And you don't need superstars to do it. That's the lesson I take from, because whenever I watch championships, right? The NBA is totally different. It's star driven. We watch the NBA, and we see how important it is for the Greek freak to play really well. 2 games in a row, 41 points. But stars in basketball are really important.
Yeah.
So is the Canadian Football League more like the NBA, or is it more like what we saw with Italy and what we see even, the comparisons you can even throw in there with Tampa Bay? Definitely the CFL is not like Tampa Bay, because there is no shortcut as far as the cap is concerned. It's true. There's been talk about, teams over the cap and stuff like that. It just isn't the same with the Canadian Football League because of the amount of talent that's available. Okay. It's less about not being able to find a talented player. It's more about being able to fit them under the cap and understand whether they can play the game. The other things, the comparisons, that's why I don't compare that to it. For me, it's the theme. If the Argos can put together a good management team that makes a couple of good decisions, and the coaching coaches what they have, not what they don't have, that's what we're waiting for to find out when it comes to the Argonauts and every other team in the Canadian Football League. I raised the Argonauts because you just talked about how well they put together the press conference. If they can do that with the team, and there's going to have to be instantaneous understanding of what the challenges are.
Yeah. I think that, if we're going to make the connection with Italy and really the CFL, there's a couple of things I think that are very important. One is unity. Everyone's kind of got to be on the same page. Everyone has to buy into what the team is doing. As an Italian, I was, following as many of the accounts of the players and the team accounts to get a sense of how they were, not just, when they played together, but off the field, and they were a team that was definitely united as a group. Like there wasn't it wasn't, and you always hear the talk about the Italy team. It was never about a player, but it was always about the team as a group. They had good leaders as well. So like when I look at the Argos, I always picture back to 2017. Why they won. They might not have had the best players, because I think Calgary over
outside of Ray, and then
yes,
you could say Bo Levi's as good as, at least
that,
at that time,
and that's
that
and
moment.
that's where I was getting to, is that Calgary on paper was the better team, but what the Argonauts had was a game plan and a group that bought in, and this just knew they couldn't make mistakes. Because how many mistakes did Calgary make in that Grey Cup that cost them? Because it was still a close game, but what really gave the Argos the edge was they didn't make that mistake that cost them, a touchdown, or prevent them from scoring a touchdown. I think when I asked every player the same question in the media press conference that I talked to, what's different about this group over the last few years where things haven't been going well? He says the amount of leadership, the leadership group, like it's already established. They've already set the precedent with the guys who are already the established leaders on this team, and they've already kind of starting to put their
Stamp.
stamp on the
Yep.
team, right? That's I think so important in any championship team. You need a group of players that are going to establish what is the goal, and really just the proper expectations for everybody involved, not just the leaders, but everyone, including everyone into it, right? You're looping everyone together. Uh, you know, and I feel like that's maybe some of the Argos lacked. Maybe they just didn't have that. They had good veteran players. Maybe they just didn't have that right group of leaders, right, to get it all done.
It's not just about leadership, it's where the leadership is.
Yes.
I firmly believe that leadership in a locker room is not good enough. It has to the leadership has to be on the field as well, on the field of play, because part of what leadership is showing the other players how it's done. They can't do it from the bench or the sidelines, if you follow what I'm saying.
Yeah,
So
I 100% agree. Like that's the thing about Ricky Ray. He wasn't the most vocal person. Ricky Ray was a guy that got it done on the field, right? I, I've
absolutely.
I've met
You
many guys, Frank. We've talked to many guys. They sound like the greatest players in the locker room, but maybe on the field they missed the play. They made a mistake. They did something that was just like, we if you made that play, like it's you're so right in that it's for every team. I looked at Winnipeg too. Winnipeg, I feel like had that as well. You know, Andrew Harris. He was seen as a big leader on the off the field, but on the field, his play was the example. Willie Jefferson. You don't tell me you need those guys to do both.
Well, they
It's
can
good.
talk. They can talk. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. No, go. I
They
think
can.
you're
They
getting
can.
to it.
They can talk all they want. I'll use Macbeth as an example. He can blame himself for everything that's going on that he blames himself for. But if he's blaming himself for stuff that isn't his fault, and that it doesn't matter if he fixes it or not because it doesn't impact the situation, that's not good either. So it's about making. We hear this a little bit, and this is the other thing. We talk about character, we talk about leadership. Let's not forget about accountability. All these teams that are playing in the Canadian Football League right now, and that are basically getting prepared for a season, they have to quickly establish accountability. And by accountability, I mean they have to erase their mistakes faster than they've ever had to erase them before. You can admit to making a mistake on the field, or you can in private talk to the other players, say, look, you can't do this anymore. And that's the kind of leadership you're talking about too,
Yeah.
which is the accountability that the the leaders make the rest of the team accountable. Everybody's accountable to everyone else. Well, you're going to have to identify as quickly as possible what is that accountability and what are they accountable for, and what makes it so that they were accountable and now they can move forward. It all has to happen because of this pandemic situation. It all has to happen at light speed. So I think what we're going to see this season, when the season starts, I don't think it's I don't think it's avoidable that there will be inconsistency by every team. I just
Yeah.
don't see perfection by any team because I think it's a bar that's going to be really hard to attain. And the question I tried asking Macbeth, and he didn't bite on it the way I was hoping. My issue is, and how do you feel about the fact that, okay, you go to camp, you think this is what you needed to do, get ready. How quickly can they understand what they didn't expect that they needed to do? How quickly can they be, make their planning, not the person, but their planning accountable, and know enough to change what they thought they should be doing? How quickly they can do that too. So it's not just individuals changing their pattern, it's also the pattern of change that they need to make.
Yeah, you know, I think McLeod gave a really good answer when I think it was your question when he's talking about you know growing and putting his team in a better situation and just as a quarterback you can't expect maybe sometimes things to happen right away. You have to keep working towards it, right? You can't let things kind of change your course. If you're committed and you believe in what you're doing, you should push forward with it as much as possible. Sure, you need to make adjustments, you need to tweak things when they're not working, but I feel like that teams that um that are successful have that ability to stick to their identity but also aren't totally set in it, right? And that they can, if something they don't expect to happen, they can figure out ways to maneuver to get around it. I feel like McLeod definitely was put in how many games we saw where he was behind the eight ball, and you're
Well,
just like, what
yeah,
can?
absolutely. The whole point of my question was you had great stats, you had a
Mhm.
great year, but there weren't the wins. What do you got to do differently? And that's when
Exactly.
he ran into that myriad of things. He still made it about him. And one thing that I think he needs to do, and part of the leadership which we just spoke about, is McLeod Bethel Thompson needs to make his teammates accountable. He doesn't have to point directly at a defender.
Yeah.
He doesn't have to, you know, point at a receiver, but he can talk about we need to make the big plays. You know, this is what I mean about accountability. You can't let your teammates off the hook. And this doesn't just happen with the Argos. We're talking about the Argos because they just had a press conference. In case you just joined us, it is the team that David and I cover. But in the grander picture, in the bigger picture, there's accountability that's necessary. You wanted to talk about a topic, and I think we should start talking about it now.
Yeah.
And that is 4 Achilles tendon injuries in the Saskatchewan practice, informal practice, not team practice, that was run by, supposedly, I don't know for sure. What we're hearing is the strength and conditioning coach was the guy in charge. Was a medicine ball thing that they were doing, throwing it in the air, and basically things went bad for 4 players. And the Players Association is concerned, if you don't mind me setting this thing up, that
Yeah.
the players are not going to get paid because it wasn't a team thing, when in fact the Players Association is going to say, well, there was a coach of the Saskatchewan Roughriders there, and the strength and conditioning guy, while he may not fit under the definitive, you know, umbrella of team management, maybe he's side-ish, kind of ish, a consultant, right? How do you feel about this situation? And do you think This is something that may permeate the preseason. That we knew going in there were going to be a lot of soft tissue injuries. These are parts of the body that need to be stretched, that need to be made into elastic. If I can act like an idiot here and try to make it simple.
Yeah, so this is everything. So I always say that it's weird because there were a lot of NFL players that were, because the NFL changed the rules and saying that OTAs or this is something I think people need to understand. OTAs in like the NFL is like off-season training activity, like it's run by the team, which means there's liability on the team if someone were to get injured or if something
Right.
were to happen because it's run by them. I believe that's the same thing here, where this is technically run by the team because it wasn't just a small group of players. There were actually, um, coaches weren't there because of COVID protocols, but trainers were there and the training staff was there. So this was, I believe, this was run by the team. So this is what concerns me, in that you know the team is basically trying to get the players ready for training camp, which is already rigorous enough. So they're putting them there. It was almost like they went from 0 to 100 because I'm gonna explain the drill. So the drill was they threw a medicine ball into the air and they had to make an explosive like cut, and finish the drill before the ball hit the ground. So there's a speed element to it. Well, if you're making cuts and stuff, and if you're not warming up the tendon properly, if you're not stretching it out properly, you can seriously injure it. I know I did. It might not suggest it, but I used to do a little bit of running, or I try to do some running training. You feel it in your Achilles. You know when you're about to do something that you shouldn't do because you start to feel it. Your body tells you.
Burn.
You feel the burn, right? And you're just like, okay, let's take a break. The fact that there's, after 4 players were injured, then they stopped the drill. I think if you have 1 or 2 players, and this is within a 6-minute period, if you have 1 to 2 players that go down, are you going to really risk more players getting hurt? I wouldn't. Like these are the players that they lost: Freddie Bishop, Nelson Lacombo, Jonathan Femi Cole, and arguably one of their better defenders, and Larry Dean. Like these aren't. This is a significant issue. I think also the Alouettes had 2 more players injured their Achilles as well.
Well, we won't hear everything, and that's where the reporting
Yeah,
comes in,
exactly.
and we'll probably down the road get what's going on, and there will be questions about players. Where are they? And then there'll be the Players Association, which will be more than willing to explain where these players are, and they will create a roster, I think, of players that they're going to say that these players were hurt getting ready for the season under the watchful eye of the team, which
Mm-hmm.
makes it a team event. And if it's a team event, the injury happened while with the team, which means they get paid, right? And that's what this is all going to come down to. And you fully well
Compensation.
know, you fully well know the CFLPA is going to make sure that if there was any kind of team, this was under any edge, maybe not under the center of the team umbrella, even if it was on the edge, you know what I mean? They're going to
Yeah.
say it was under the umbrella. It may not be under the umbrella like you are trying to, you know, define that. Well, they weren't completely under the team umbrella, so therefore we don't have to pay them. It's going to be one of those situations where they're going to say, well, they were partway through, so they were under the umbrella.
Yeah.
That's going to be the debate, David. The debate, David's going to be, did the players knowingly participate in an event that wasn't sponsored by the team, or by definition wasn't a team event? That's going to be the argument. It's all going to come down to, was it a team event? By my definition, if you've got a team personnel there,
Yes.
it's a team event, because that by virtue of that being the case, they can argue it all they want, and I can make a lot of enemies in CFL teams, maybe make friends by saying this with the CFLPA. But the fact is, you're not, you're either pregnant or you're not, right? So this is one of those times that there's a parallel to that, where there, it's just a question of how 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 pregnant they were, not if they were or were not. And I think that's what's going to happen. There's going to have to be some sort of, that the CFL is going to have to step in, right? Because
Yes.
essentially the CFL is going to have to protect itself as a group, you know, and they can't sit idly by while the teams are having this go on and the players are having that go on, and the team can't sit there. So hopefully, I assume there have been conversations saying, look, what you're doing, Saskatchewan, what Saskatchewan did, we as a league, I'm not saying this is what they're saying. I'm just
Mhm.
presupposing that they'll go to the teams and say, look, guys, this smells like a team event, looks like a team event. Doesn't matter whether you say it wasn't, it's a team event as far as we're concerned. And I'm talking about privately, the league talking to the teams. That if you don't want a problem, I would suggest not doing this kind of stuff. Remember a long time ago we talked about, will the CFL come up with standards and practices, of ways to, remember I was asking if they would do something like, help the teams as a whole to make sure that they understand what are some of the safe ways to practice. Do you know what I'm saying? But
Yeah.
I suppose the independence of teams allows them the opportunity to make those mistakes without any input from the league.
Well, we've already seen one fundamental shift in how the CFL operates its practices by eliminating contact, right? And that
Right.
was all designed to prevent injuries because guess what? Injuries cost money because you got to pay the player's medical bills and lost wages.
Right.
Well,
And then you
if
got to
you're the
hire a new
CFL,
guy, and then you got to pay
and,
him.
and then you got to get another guy, right? So if you're the CFL, how can we limit that liability? And and I think also the CFL schedule is very tough, right? We're gonna have there are teams who I think have played 3 games in 11 days, if I'm not wrong. Like limited breaks in between. That is not good for players have made it known their concerns about injuries because of that, right? So if you're a league, I think the first thing the CFL is going to do is they'll do their due diligence and investigate and check with Saskatchewan, say what happened here, was it preventable, what did you do to avoid any potential further injuries. Then they're going to send a memo to all the teams and say, and pretty much probably will say, this is what we deem proper training techniques or proper etiquette
Yeah.
or something like that.
Standards.
You, standards. And
Yeah.
that to me, I don't know how the league and the PA didn't come together and say, what can we do to ensure players aren't pushing themselves too farther than they should right away.
This is what.
The
Oh, go. I'm sorry. Go. Go.
And I'll just give you an example. On Saturday, when the Argos talked for the first time, that Dinwiddie said they didn't push right away. They kind of took it easy to start. Then they kind of ramped it up a little bit after that. I would think that would be the logical thing to do. Is that you don't want. I understand you want to set the standard right away, but you also have how many days of training camp, and
I. Oh.
it's so puzzling because I understand how important it is, especially if you're a team like Saskatchewan who has a standard that they want to follow, even like a Winnipeg and Hamilton, where you would have expectations, but these guys haven't been on the field in like 18 months.
Can I simplify the point I wanted to make, and I've wanted
Go
to
ahead.
make way back then? This is what the point I was trying to make, and I'm trying to figure out how to say it in a way that makes sense and is easier to understand. They should, at the beginning, it's all about stretching. They should have made it all about stretching, all about, see, there's when you go to training camp, you got your, I'm not an expert at training camp, only by watching. You've got your preparation for practice, which is basically stretching and making sure that what you're practicing doesn't end up going bad, right? Isn't that the whole thing? So for me, it's about stretching, technique, and execution, right?
Yep.
If you go from stretching to execution, you might have a problem. You really need to stretch for the technique. And I'm oversimplifying this, and people want to get to laugh at me the way I'm explaining it. I'm just trying to use words because I think words matter. So they need to stretch, then they need to do technique that stretching is safe about, right? It's just like social distancing, it's just like wearing a mask. You don't like it, but it's better to be safe than sorry. So
Yeah.
that's what they needed to do. What we witness now with Saskatchewan, they went from we don't even know if they got a chance to stretch to execution because that's not that's not technique, right? What they were doing was not technique. That was execution, making sure they can do the toughest part about playing the game. They didn't soft in, they hard in, like you said. And they need to spend more time. They really do need to spend, I hope, more time stretching, more time preparing the body for what's going to happen, even longer than they think they should. That's the way I see it. And if this is going to be a lesson for that.
I think so. Like, they probably did stretch, they probably did all those things, but and you're totally right. You have to assume that it's going to take a little bit more time for these players to get going. And look, I know a lot of them have, and probably a lot of them feel, look, I've been training for 18 months. I've been putting my body through training. It's totally different when you add pads, when you add helmet, when you add equipment that you probably didn't have, because probably some players have equipment lying around, but I don't think most are training in full gear. I don't think so, because you're not, when I
And in
assume that,
gear, not just full gear, in gear, like
yeah.
in the
Like, you're not
gear,
lifting
in
weights with
gear.
your shoulder pads on. You're not doing certain. You're probably wearing cleats when you're doing cuts and stuff, but you're not wearing your
Absolutely.
pads. You're not wearing your helmet. You're not wearing all those. I don't. I assume that they're not. And maybe this is. And I meant to get a hold of him. I couldn't get a hold of him in time, but I wanted to have Natea J on to talk to him about this, because he's a guy that maybe we'll have him on next week to talk about this a bit more, because I just think that the only people that know the limit that they can push themselves are the players themselves,
But
and
then
maybe the
again
players.
but then again, David, even they don't know a little bit either, especially under the circumstances that we find ourselves.
Yeah,
Like you just said something else that made me think. If they go from not wearing cleats, like when they practice at home and when they do all their stretching, when they do all whatever it is that they're doing to prepare for the game, once you put those cleats on, like the equipment, that's the first thing. The effect it has on your muscles and your Achilles tendon, because the sharp, we've seen injuries that have ended seasons because a player, just twists the wrong way after training camp. We look at a lot of quarterbacks. I mean, Darian Durant. Remember what happened to him? He was all by
oh, yeah,
himself. So those kinds of injuries are basically certain parts of the body acting a certain way that another part of the body isn't ready for.
yeah.
There's a laundry list of things that you can do, and a laundry list opposing things that can affect you. Go ahead. What you
I've
said
seen
really scratched me.
and you're sure I've seen the flukiest of injuries. I look at. I'm going to bring up Italy again. Spinazzola
Oh my goodness,
against
that's one of those injuries.
against Belgium, running for the ball. He had a wrong step. Achilles done for. I think he's done for 6 to 8 months.
Right.
Right? It can happen to anyone, even guys who are in full training. Fluke injuries can happen. What we're trying to get at here is when four players go down in a 6 minute span. Some like that's not a fluke, in my opinion. There's a difference between those regards. And yes, I also think that, conditions are another factor too.
Absolutely.
What was the field condition like? What were they training on, right? Some of these players might have gone to a grass field. Some might have been training on a turf field. You brought this up last week in our talk last week. BMO Field, You're going from I think Lampport's a turf
Right.
field.
Lamport, sure.
BMO Field's grass. Two
Well deserved.
totally different surfaces you have to prepare for. You wear different cleats on turf than you do on grass. I'm pretty sure of that. I those are factors that it's on the training staff, and I know I think it's Danny Webb is the Argos trainer.
Yep.
He handled the equipment. I remember him. He was the MVP of the Grey Cup because he got the
Yes,
guys to
I
change
wanted to mention
the
that because
cleats.
that's another reason why they beat Calgary, because they had better staples.
Yeah, they were slipping and sliding. He's like, okay, you guys need to change to these cleats, otherwise you're going to keep slipping and sliding. And lo and behold, it proved to be valuable. Like those are things that as a team you have to consider all these factors when you're doing your drills. And if there was a condition that made this, a hazard for players to be in, oh boy, they're gonna find themselves in a very tough situation with the PA.
And what did I mean when I said the league needs to step in? The league needs to find out what happened to those players. They need to get to the specifics. What drill were they doing? Where were they doing? All these questions you asked, the league needs to hear about it, because they need to understand it so they can share that information with the rest of the teams. That's what league management's about. League management protects the game, right? So the game is the players, right? The game also is salary certainty, right? Cost
Yes.
certainty. And injuries are not certain. You don't know when and if they're going to happen. So the league as a group needs to, for the benefit of the teams at their own, a big, a big, if you, a big bad thing happened in Florida. What we're finding out in Florida is that a condo, 12-story condo went down when they knew in advance there was a problem, but nobody took care of it. Why did nobody take care of it? Because it cost money, I think. This is just my opinion. So they have a meeting. They say there's a problem. Should we fix it? Well, a lot of reasons why they didn't fix it. At the top of the list in my mind is money, because they pay for it. Sometimes people need to be protected from themselves. Football is nowhere near as important as that incident. But from one incident, you can learn, you can extrapolate information and understand that the Canadian Football League teams, not intentionally, all right, will, like a team like Saskatchewan, they'll be not talking about what happened. They'll first try to avoid, this is just an assumption because I've seen it so many times. They'll avoid blame. They'll do whatever it is to avoid talking about it, to avoid giving information, because if they give information, the league will be able to say, see, you should have done, so what should happen? That's why the league has to step in, because the league has to figure out what's best for everybody, and be the big brother in this situation. And they need, Saskatchewan needs a big brother. Toronto needs a big brother. The Montreal Alouettes need a big brother. That's what the Canadian Football League should be. They should be protecting the teams from themselves, because the motivation to win can blind you. That's my only point. And making the right decision sometimes is one that you can't make.
Yeah, and you're totally right, because I mean, there is no sport in my opinion that is willing to go the extra mile, even when it might not be the right, it might be not be the right decision than football, because the competitiveness of the players and the coaches, I think, is on another level from any other sport that I have ever watched or covered. You hear the way the players talk, the mentality that they speak with. These are guys that are all about the winning. We're all about winning, and they'll do
Absolutely.
whatever it takes. If they're sold on, if you do this, you will win, they are going to do it. So that was the concern. That's the concern I have, is who's got the player's best interest in hand. We already know it's supposed to be the PA, because they represent the players.
Right.
It should be the teams as well, because teams sign contracts with these players. There's a liability that they take on. There's a responsibility that they take on. So that's the concerning part to me, is that, were the teams looking more about getting the players that, up to speed and some sort of edge, because the last thing you want is for your team to start off slow and always playing catch up. I know
Right.
coaches hate doing that.
3 words and
Oh,
2 words. 3 words, and that's all I'm gonna interrupt you with.
go ahead.
Short-term thinking, right?
Yep.
Short-sightedness. That's what they need to be protected against. That is what ruins teams, because when they don't take into account, I said I stop right there. I'll let the
No,
word
no. I
self-explain.
think you're totally right on that.
I'll
Right?
let the word self-explain.
Coaches, sometimes coaches, and I know a lot of coaches, I know a lot of especially those that are in a win now approach. They, especially, and I hate this, with rookies and any of those, some of them don't care about those things because their mindsets on winning. So what can we do in the short term to reach that goal? But yeah, the long-term picture, their long-term picture, because they feel like
Gets
if we win,
affected. It gets affected by short-term thinking.
because if we win, if we do well, what does that mean for me? I get to keep my job. I get, you know, it's
Get my name on a
gratification for all
trophy.
the work we've done.
Get my name on the trophy. But sports is full. You can go every league, everywhere, where the teams that don't do well are the teams that need to be a little more forward thinking, right? The teams that always do well are the teams that are forward thinking. And that's what I mean with that's where the Canadian Football League, when it comes to the health and safety of the players, they need to be forward thinking. They have an obligation for the most important reason. The players are the asset that make the game what it is. What what is the next most important thing is the cost to play the game. So the short-sightedness, the salaries that might have to be paid, those will hurt Saskatchewan if they're forced to pay those salaries, because then their cap is going to shrink, right?
Yeah.
So in essence, it goes to what I said. Sometimes the league has to be the big brother, right? The
Yeah.
conscience, use whatever term you want, where they have to be the ones that say, guys, you can't cross this line. It's the whole reason why the cap exists. Why does the cap exist? Because the teams needed to be protected against themselves. Because leave an owner to make a decision, he's going to get convinced to spend more money because it might mean winning. It's a shortcut to winning. Managing the cap is a whole different kettle of fish. We can talk about everything else. We can talk about how much you pay players. We can talk about how many star players you have. But the cap makes it not as easy as picking the best players and having the best group of players. The cap has taught us you need to have the best team. Tampa Bay won because they were able to overcome the cap by having their very best players sit out the whole season and then join them in the playoffs. Can you imagine what the Leafs could have done with $11 million if Austin Matthews sat out the whole season?
Yeah. No,
That's what today's
I
sports is.
and I agree with that. And that's something, again, it's something that, if we see it, how come they don't see it? Right? Because
I think they see it, David. I think they see it. It's just like I said, they can't. They're their own worst enemy, David, because knee-jerk reaction.
yeah.
No, long-term thinking means you have to make tough decisions, right? You have to make tough decisions. If you think making 10, 15 stupid decisions is going to overcome one big bad decision, nope. Sometimes you make one big bad decision. You know, I've seen in the Canadian Football League, I've seen so many times where a team lets a really good player go, and for some reason the team gets better. Why is that? Well, there's lots of reasons. And a lot of them have to do with long-term good. You get rid of a big salary, now all of a sudden you can fill up all the other holes you have, and then you try and with the multiple people, multiple players, make up the difference of the quality of that player that left.
I
Cap
you
cap world.
you always see, even when a big player goes down with an injury, we can't replace what this player does single-handedly. It's going to have to be a group effort. We always hear that. It's on the group to get it done. And yeah, I think, we look at what Saskatchewan lost, right? Because they lost four good players. They didn't lose. They lost established players. So what's going to happen? They're going to have to find a way to fill that void, and it's
Right.
probably going to be tough to expect it all on the replacements. But that's where depth comes into play, and that's where coaching now comes into play. A player is going to come in and it's going to
And
be
desperation, the worst enemy
yeah.
of team sports. Desperation is a killer.
And the coach is going to have to say, look, we don't expect you to replace Larry Dean, but this is what you can do to, this is what we're going to do to make sure that absence isn't a big hole for us. And I think that's what you're going to see Saskatchewan have to do. Maybe, hey, maybe there's a cut from another team and boom, you plug and play that player in. There's a possibility with that too. We've talked about this offseason, this training camp. You can see a lot of players get a cut that you didn't expect, and that's
There's
maybe
been a lot of players.
that could benefit a team like Saskatchewan now that lost some pretty significant players on the defensive side of the ball. By the way, that's their best. That's their strength,
Right. And
as well.
if we can take that little segue, and that is um, the interesting season that this is going to be. Historically, it's always been a case of players who get released by one team end up immediately going to another team. There's the extra reason for them to go to another team because it's traveling north south, not east west. That's going to be a problem even today. And we've got some players already that other teams. Well, you talked about Matavius Bryant, who's a great player that the Argos are hoping to have. He's stuck with passport issues. And as you said before we were talking, why does he have passport issues? Hasn't he had a long time to deal with this? Well, it's another one of those situations where short-sightedness, short-term thinking affects you long term, right? So now the Argos, as you heard in the press conference today, if he doesn't show up soon, they're going to have to figure out a way to work around him. And because all these players that they brought in, their value now becomes really important, and they have players that they can plug and play, if you will. But this kind of stuff, and there's going to be a lot of players that are going to be moving east west, and from one Canadian city to another, because they're more valuable now. The cuts in Canada, because you're not talking NFL cuts now. You're not talking guys who are down south that are going to be, how much different is that guy we have that's down south, or the guy that just got cut from Hamilton? How different are they? Well, is it worth the problem of waiting to get him to come up here? And can he, this guy's already here. He can come right away. That there may be, I guess the waiver might allow, from Canadian team to Canadian team, like the National Hockey League, they were able to play right away because they were in Canada. So this is why cuts are going to be a lot of fun in the Canadian Football League. All these guys, man, there's going to be a lot of people watching what's going on, whatever they can, as far as the CFL is concerned.
Especially that very first cut, because you might see some surprises right out the gate. Players are not ready. They're just not. They couldn't get themselves going, and
it's going to be Argos case. They got a lot of aces, right? The first guys to go are going to be the aces because they can't afford to put too many aces under the cap. So, to your way of thinking there, that's going to be another reason why the good players are going to become available right away.
And maybe it's a strategy, right? It's where you don't want to do it too late in that player. Teams can kind of plan and anticipate it. So if you're going to cut a guy, maybe you do it early so that teams are like, oh, we can't get him to fit in, or like you do it at a point where teams are just not able, because that it might sound selfish, but this is also we just talked this whole thing about winning and the competition.
Absolutely.
You don't want to give that. You don't want to give off the impression that a good player is going to become available. Some teams are probably planning for it, because if you fail to prepare, if you don't plan to be successful, well, you're going to plan for failure. I always forget how that always words out, but I was trying to think
Prepare
about
for
it on the spot.
prepare for
It's
success.
yeah. So if you're a team right now, and look, yeah, the Argos said it's passport issues with Martavis Bryant and Kendall Wright, two guys were starters in the NFL. Like the Argos have tried to get those guys in. They've done, they tried it a few years ago. Oh, the name is skipping me right now. It was it was a situation where it was an American guy, but he had a Canadian birth, so he would have counted as a national. I can probably look it up very quickly, but the Argonauts have tried. I mean, and look, and it's not just the Argos that are doing this right now. They TJ Jones, that's who it was. Um, and so if you're a team right now, you know, yeah, are you looking, maybe the Canadian guys are the ones you're going to give more of an opportunity to because they're there. They don't have to go through the same quarantines and all players are under the same restrictions once they're in camp, but it's the
Right.
movement.
It's
You
going
know,
from team to team where things are going to get interesting, and the
mhm,
availability of players, the immediate um, the immediate resolution of holes in your lineup will be easier to fill with other teams' players that are released than going north south. I don't think there's any doubt about that. Um,
no,
if you look at now in camp, well, now we've if you just joined us, he's David Morassutti. I'm Candid Frank Stanisci. We've discussed um, some things, the press conference that the Argos had, and it was what we established in that conversation is that patience, while it's a really good thing, if you're a coach and you're picking the players you want to go with, patience is a little bit strained because you need to get going. You need to have the guys because you got to coach them up. It takes time to coach them up. You need to make sure what we've learned from Saskatchewan, we talked about that, where we got to make sure the players are able to survive the drills and the practice sessions that are in front of them that are, to say the least, probably more excessive than those in the past, regardless of contact, because what we're talking about are soft tissue injuries, and we're talking about injuries that happen to players because just being a player and running around, non-contact injuries. We've seen them. We're going to see more of them. We have proof already that that's true. We have proof. So that's where we've been so far. As far as we talked also about the availability of players that are available in Canada, be easier to go east-west. What other subject do you think is important in the context of the way these practices are going? Um, can we talk a little bit about what we do in the last couple of minutes? Interesting experience. This might not interest the fans, but as a person of the press who covers, CFL teams, we're talking about social distancing. We're talking about Zoom calls while you're at practice. We've seen it in the National Hockey League. We've seen it in baseball. We've seen it in basketball, where you don't see microphones in the faces of players. They sit. How do you think that's going to affect the reporting? What have you learned early? You referred to the way the Argos did it, doing it
yeah,
very professionally and very very systematic.
efficiently. It was running like a well-oiled machine. The players were, because sometimes the issue we have is we have to wait for players because we either might not get them or they want to go and shower first or they may want to go and change or go to the locker room first, and you're waiting and waiting and waiting. So I guess if time wise is being done more efficiently. I'm the type of person that likes the face-to-face interaction. I mean, you and I have done this show
Enough.
over video for a long time, that we are able to kind of I've gotten used to talking with people over video, and as an Italian, I like that interaction face to face. I feel like the players talking to a camera and talking to a screen isn't the same as in person. I feel like there is a difference, and it's tough because right now the Argos are having training camp in Guelph. if you're going to go all the way to Guelph, you're committing yourself to watching a practice.
Right.
And almost that's it. I mean, you can do the Zoom, but the Zoom press conference. But I also am not a fan of background noises or things that are going to be distracting when you're doing these. Like, this is where I do all my Zoom calls from. Like, it's quiet. I don't have any distractions with me. So,
Internet provider.
oh yes, by
Good,
the way, yes,
consistent.
I have a wired connection. I know a lot of people are wireless these days. I'm still a fan of the landline. Less chances of any
Me too.
hiccups there.
I am as well here. I'm connected with a wire.
It's you know what? Eventually, and it's funny because a lot of reporters are talking about this. How much longer are you going to keep reporters out of the locker rooms or out of? Because if you're going to allow fans to pack into the stands all together, I understand players a little different because you don't want players to go down with COVID or put that risk out there. But at what point do we? Or is this is I don't expect this to be the new norm. I don't think teams want it to be the norm. And I
David,
hope players don't want it either.
there's a nightmare here that we haven't touched, which we'll talk about maybe next week. There's also the issue of the players who refuse to be vaccinated. Now, that's a side issue. We can talk about that later. Now, if they can say you have no right to ask me if I'm vaccinated, right? So how can the teams have reporters come in who, if they don't feel like they have to be vaccinated, and if they feel they shouldn't even be asked, so teams are going to say, for until somebody's comfortable with the idea that someone not vaccinated comes into the locker room, right? When they want their players to get vaccinated, but they're not saying it and insisting on it, right?
Yeah.
That's to answer that question that because there's a parallel there, right? Because
Yeah.
people are people. There are people who are okay with getting vaccinated. There are people like me who go, I really would rather not do it, but I'm going to trust the science. And then there are the people, no matter what the science says, I don't think I'm getting vaccinated. Forget it. It ain't happening, right? And those
Mhm.
people are not just players. Those people are players, reporters, fans. These are the things we're going to have to deal with. And as far as the media is concerned, you already have to accommodate players who don't want to be vaccinated. How readily acceptable is it to have media guys come in? And can you see the Argos, for example, saying to you and I, are you vaccinated? I would tell them. I wouldn't have a problem with it. I say, listen, I'm double vaccinated. It's been over 2 weeks. In fact, it's going on 3 or 4 now. So I should be okay. Well, what about the variants? All these things, we're not out of the woods 100% because there's the part up here we have to overcome. There's that part, the part up here that we have to overcome. The fear factor is still there. And there are people who refuse to get vaccinated. And the combination of those two things enhances the fear, right? So I'm
Mhm.
dying to see how they deal with that.
Yeah, I would say people are like, oh, is it right to ask someone if they're vaccinated? I said, yes, of course it is. This is health and safety first and foremost. That's all. I know we're
But
running
you're
out of time.
different,
So
David. David, you're different.
yeah,
Most the people who don't want to get vaccinated are not going to, tell you, right?
yeah, exactly. So I see. Yes, it's a personal choice. It's also my personal choice to want to know information that's going to keep me safe as well.
But we'll
And I
leave
think
that.
that's.
We'll make that the last word. Give you the last word. Thank you, David.
Thank you, Frank.
For David Morassutti, I'm Candid Frank Stanisci. Thank you for watching CFL Talk, airing live Mondays at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. The show can also be heard on the Spanglish World Radio Network. For CFL Talk news, entertainment, and other sports programming we offer, please check out spanglishworld.ca. Spanglish World. Watch it, hear it, read it, download it, and live it. Thank you for watching. Until next Monday at 2 o'clock. We'll see you then.